All right, so are we alone? It's a pretty big question, right?
Yeah, it is.
One that I think we've all kind of looked up at the stars and thought about.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's what we're going to be diving into today. Some material that we found about the possibility of alien life and how we're searching for it, and even some historical claims and stuff like that.
Right. So there's no concrete proof or anything like that, but there's some really interesting stuff in here for sure.
Yeah, definitely some compelling points in here for sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things that really stood out to me was just the sheer scale of the universe.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we're talking billions of galaxies.
It's unimaginable, yeah.
With billions of stars.
Yeah.
And each of those has the possibility of having their own planetary systems and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest arguments, right? Just statistically speaking, the odds of us being alone are
Couldn't be very low.
infinitesimally small.
Yeah. And it's not just quantity, right? It's the different types of conditions for life, like the habitable zone thing that kept coming up.
Right. And this is, that Goldilocks area around a star where it's not too hot, not too cold. Liquid water could exist.
Exactly.
And, as we know it, that's one of the key ingredients for life as we understand it.
Yeah.
And so, the fact that we are finding exoplanets in these habitable zones now is, incredibly exciting.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But it also, makes you think beyond just Earth-like planets too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. We tend to be a little Earth-centric in our thinking.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that these sources brought up that I thought was really interesting is, places like Europa or Enceladus.
Oh yeah.
These moons that have subsurface oceans.
Right.
That are, shielded from all the radiation and everything on the surface.
Right.
Potentially those could be, teeming with microbial life.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, so it really expands our idea of what habitable might even mean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Drake equation also comes up in the material.
Right, yeah.
I think it's worth kind of touching on that briefly for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar. Can you kind of explain what that is?
Yeah, so, in the simplest terms, the Drake equation is this attempt to come up with a way to estimate the number of civilizations in our galaxy that could potentially communicate with us.
Right.
And it looks at all these different factors, like the rate of star formation, how many of those stars have planets, how many of those planets are habitable, and then on top of that, how many of those actually develop life, and then intelligent life, and then technologically advanced life.
Right.
And, one of the things that the sources point out is it's a great thought experiment.
Yeah.
But
a lot of those numbers we don't.
We have no idea.
We have no idea.
So it's like a good way to frame the problem.
Right.
But it's not like a definitive answer by any means.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a way to organize our thinking, but
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got this kind of, sense of scale. This idea of, maybe where life could be.
Yeah.
But then how do we actually go about looking for it?
Right. Well, there's a bunch of really cool stuff happening right now.
Right.
One of the things that the sources talked about that, I think is fascinating is SETI.
Right.
The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And they're basically using these massive radio telescopes to listen for signals from space, any kind of artificial signal that could be coming from another civilization.
Yeah.
And then, on a more kind of like, throwing a message in a bottle kind of way, we've got things like the Voyager probes that are carrying these, golden records with information about humanity out into interstellar space.
It's so cool.
Yeah, so...
It's just out there billions of years from now. Who knows? Maybe somebody will find it.
Maybe, yeah.
But then, closer to home, we've got things like the Perseverance rover on Mars
Right.
that's actually actively looking for signs of ancient life,
Yeah, yeah.
microbial life.
Yeah.
And, it's collecting samples, and, we're hoping that, maybe in those samples we'll find some biosignatures
Right.
that could tell us that there was once life on Mars.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we've got the James Webb Space Telescope,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
which is just, blowing our minds every day with the images it's sending back.
For sure.
But one of the really cool things it can do is analyze the atmospheres of exoplanets.
Wow.
And so it can actually look for chemical signatures
Right.
that might indicate the presence of life.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really, like you said, it's this multi-pronged approach, right? Like we've got people looking, in our own solar system, we've got people sending stuff out. Exactly.
And we've got people listening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really exciting to see all the different ways that we're approaching this question.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
So the other thing that came up a lot in the material was all the historical claims and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And more recently, the UAPs and everything like that.
Right. It's definitely something that people are fascinated by.
Yeah.
And, the sources kind of touch on everything from, ancient structures and people interpreting those as evidence of alien visitation to, modern day sightings and,
Right.
these declassified government reports. And, sources acknowledge that there's all these claims. But I think the thing that they all kind of agree on is that there's no smoking gun evidence.
Right.
It's a lot of anecdotal stories
Yeah.
and interpretations and things like that.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because we've got this really compelling case
Yeah.
for the possibility of life. And, there are people actively out there looking for it.
Absolutely.
But then we've got this whole other side of it.
Yeah.
Where it's there's just not that hard proof yet.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that the sources really emphasize is that this is a scientific question.
Right.
It's not about belief or, wanting to believe or not wanting to believe. It's about evidence.
Yeah.
And, following the evidence wherever it leads.
Right.
And so, I think that's kind of the takeaway here is that, this is a really important question. It's something that we should be curious about.
Yeah.
But we should also be, approaching it with a critical and scientific mindset.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it really does tap into, I think, something fundamental about what it means to be human, right?
Totally. Yeah.
This idea of where do we come from? Are we alone in the universe?
Yeah, it's these big existential questions
Right.
that I think we're all kind of grappling with in some way or another.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So that kind of leads me to a thought that I was having as I was going through this material.
Yeah.
And I'd love to kind of throw this out to our listeners to think about. So given, everything we've talked about, the scale of the universe,
Yeah.
all the research that's being done, what do you think the single most profound implication would be for humanity if we were to discover life beyond Earth?
Yeah.
Even if it was just, microbial life.
Yeah.
How do you think that would change our understanding of biology,
Yeah.
our place in the universe?
Totally. I think it would be a paradigm shift.
Yeah,
It would force us to completely rethink our place in the cosmos.
exactly.
So, yeah, that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what our listeners think
Me too.
about that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's our deep dive into
Yeah.
the possibility of alien life.
It was fun.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.